So one thing that really interests me, Kayvon, is this sort of alliance between many leftists in the West and Islam as a people, or almost as a race, or at least they seem to think they're the same. Could you maybe touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's a sort of alliance. I'd say it's an
Hmm.
alliance, and it's an alliance of partly, you know, the shallower reading of it is my enemy of my enemy is my friend, and the deeper reading of it is what Nietzsche and other philosophers called ressentiment, which just translates to resentment. And it's the channeling of all your frustration to one attributable source. And for a lot of Western leftists, that's Western civilization, that they see as this is really kind of a 60s, post 1960s phenomenon that really started in our universities, in our garbage universities with loser academics. That you could get into Andrew Breitbart and critical theory and all that stuff. Just wanting to deconstruct everything about society and critique everything about society with the goal of essentially tearing all this down, as though there's no internal logic behind the way American culture developed over time. And I mean, to be fair, discrimination exists. There are problems, no doubt about it, especially for American blacks. And this is interesting too. This encapsulates it perfectly. Really helps answer your question, I think. I was in Iran in October 2015, and I was at a bus station. I was going from Esfahan. Where was I? In any case, I was traveling between two cities, and I'm buying my bus ticket, speaking with the woman in Persian, and she asked me where I'm from because I have an accent when I speak Persian, and I said I'm from New York, and she kind of gave me a look, just that there was some kind of disapproval. She had religious dress on too. She was definitely a more conservative religious woman working there. And I said, "Oh, what do you think? What do you think?" Well, she said, "Well, the translation would be," she said, "in the United States, the lives of black people don't matter to Americans." And I said, "Wow, this is Black Lives Matter in Iran. This is really amazing, the affinity taking place here. It's an odd bedfellow, and it's interesting that it went international, that this concept, which has some truth to it, to be fair. I mean, I'm not someone who totally writes this stuff off. I mean, I've talked about this in previous posts too, but I mean, yeah, I mean, there's, in the final analysis, would you rather be a white guy confronted by a police officer or a black guy confronted by a police officer? So there is a real basis to this too. It can get exaggerated, but in any case, what was interesting to me was just that it had made it all the way to Iran. Similarly, I was watching Ayatollah Khamenei's Friday sermon last Friday, and again, he said the same thing. He said, not what she said, not what the woman at the bus station said, but he said, look at he said, the protesters are all agitators motivated by the United States and outside forces like the Great Satan. But look at these countries. Look at the United States. In the United States, they can just go and shoot a black person without any problems, and the judiciary and their judiciary is completely flawed, and they have the gall to come and admonish our judiciary. So it was a way of using Black Lives Matter. Now, I don't think he cares about blacks. I don't. He's not motivated by humanitarianism at all. He's using it as a way to discredit the American judicial system, thereby giving Americans no credibility to criticize Iran's very flawed Sharia-based judiciary system. Now, I don't want to get into Black Lives Matter. I mean, obviously this stuff's complicated. And I mean, yeah, he has a point when some of these shootings take place with impunity. But it was just so interesting the way it had become internationally politicized to me. So you have it both ways. You have the American left, which are basically dressed up Marxists at this point, aligning themselves with Islamists for a few reasons. And you've got Islamists in Iran aligning themselves with the American left on Black Lives Matter to discredit the West. And again, I think it comes down to just pure resentment towards Western civilization and a total lack of perspective, as well as this very deliberate effort to push multiculturalism on the United States and this ahistorical belief that all cultures can just coexist next to one another without any civil strife. I'm sorry, but you look at world history, or even look at the world today, the idea that diversity is a factor that brings people together rather than divides people is just not true. I mean, it is just not true at all. It's the cause of many wars, and it's the cause of race riots in the United States historically too. And you could look at, there's this professor, Robert Putnam, who I'm pretty sure is a self-described liberal. And he wrote this really seminal book called Bowling Alone, in which he did this massive study of all these different communities. I can't remember his sample size, but it was huge. It's a very big study. And he wanted to kind of understand civil life in the United States. And his conclusion, he didn't like. He had to publish it, but he didn't like what. Are you familiar with Bowling Alone?
Sounds familiar.
He didn't like his conclusion because it was antithetical to a lot of the multicultural beliefs that we have been inculcated in the United States. And what he found was that communities and cities that have greater indicators of diversity, that have more diverse ethnic and religious groups rather than being largely homogeneous, you have a breakdown of social trust between those groups. But not just that, you have a reduced social trust within your group as well. Do you understand what I'm saying? So, and it leads to what he called like a hunkering in process, where people in diverse communities are less likely to participate in social life. They're less likely to be on a city council or even to vote or to join a church group or to volunteer in their community. And they're more likely, it's correlated with a lot more watching television. This is really, this is inconvenient. We might not like it, but again, we can't have political correctness because the truth is generally an awful thing. And we have to deal with policy on the basis, and well-ordered societies on the basis of human nature and truth. And the reality, it plainly is that diversity is not this fantastic thing that has only led to great Chinese restaurants and CEOs in Silicon Valley, many of whom are Iranian, by the way. A lot of those guys are Iranians, again, when we want to draw a direct line between the Persian Golden Age and a lot of the Iranian contributions, even to Western civilization today and to technology. But, so...
Well, one thing that strikes me as curious often is the inherent patriarchal and sexist and misogynistic aspects of the Quran itself and the Hadith, the supplemental texts, and the simple fact that all you have to do is open these books to find them and look to really almost anywhere in the world, let alone the 13 countries that employ Islam as their governing scripture. To find the very thing that many leftists and feminists and so on and social justice warriors claim to despise, and rightfully so, yet there's this soft bigotry of low expectations, or this just what you were saying is the raison d'etre. I can't pronounce that. Raison d'être. Sorry. And that just strikes me as curious over and over again.
Oh, it is. It's very curious. Yeah. I'll say this here. Hold on one second. Stay with me. I'm not going anywhere. So, I see in our universities there's this new critical theory in the past several decades or so where everything gets criticized, and you see it on these dumb Mike.com and BuzzFeed articles where the Lion King is racist and this is racist and that's sexist, and we have to just tear everything down. All of history is explained by oppressor and oppressed. It's really Marxism. It's dressed up Marxism. They explain history and where we are today as a result of oppressor and oppressed. And there's some truth to it. You can't say there's no. Of course, there's power asymmetry between a slave and a slave master too, but there's more that went into that also. It's more complicated than just this Marxist reading of it in terms of how we ended up where we are today. But so they apply this critical theory type of thinking and find racism and sexism and homophobia and now transphobia, and who knows what it'll be next. I mean, it's just a panoply of LGBTQIABCD. I mean, it's everything. So if you want to find that stuff, you'll find that stuff. And it's funny, like there was some diversity officer, I can't remember the details, but one of these universities saying, when I finally learned that racism is everywhere, I started seeing racism everywhere. It's like, yeah, of course, you're going to find that if that's how you approach it. But at the same time, if you're going to stand up for these causes and stand up for social justice, just look at this book. Have fun. Just go to any page, It's not very difficult. You don't need critical theory. You don't need to deconstruct every word to find sexism. You can find it right there, and a total abnegation of the rights of free thought, and that's one of the biggest problems that I have now.
What you'll see with the Quran is the actual implementation of that en masse. And you may have seen that in Christianity and Judaism at one point, but it's not nearly to the same degree at this day and age. And that's their common argument, which is, well, the Bible has sexist and misogynistic passages as well, in defense of Islam.
Right. But there are a bunch of differences. The most significant of which is that the Quran is a coherent document and a legal document that is the basis for a society. That is expressly what it is for. It is not about just how to treat your neighbor. It's not interpersonal relations. No, it's a legal document. It's
Sharia. It's law.
Written. Yes. Now, you have various schools of Islamic jurisprudence that interpret those laws, but they basically agree on the fundamentals. I mean, there's not one school of jurisprudence that thinks it's okay to eat bacon and thinks that you should be fine with apostates, that you should allow apostates to flourish, and one that thinks bacon's bad and that apostates should be beheaded. No, they all think bacon's bad, and they all think that apostates should get some pretty draconian punitive measures. They're not very nice to apostates at all in the Quran. There's no other way to read it.
And most of the few moderate Muslims take the Ahmadiyya community. I don't know much about that subsect. It's tiny, but they're not even considered Muslims by the vast majority of Muslims. They're considered the same as apostates and atheists.
Yeah, that's right. Yes. Same goes for Sufis as well. Yeah, any of these these orders that you're referring to, no, that's why when you talk about Islamic fundamentalism, it's really redundant. You're just talking about Islam. It's redundant. You are talking about Islam. Let's be very clear what you are talking about here. But I want to say also, so to bring it back to some of the reasons for this affinity between the American or the Western left, their embrace of Islam, some of it too, you have to understand the capacity. This is probably best exemplified in Germany, the capacity for guilt and now modern self-flagellation is a very potent force in the West too. Especially in Germany. I mean, Angela Merkel has said so explicitly in terms of when asked about embracing, 1 million or so refugees, and along with all the constituent problems that have emanated from that. And I mean, it was a horrible mistake. But then again, you got to get foreign policy in here too. I mean, bombing the shit out of Libya was not a good idea either. I would oppose that as well. So there's multiple layers here. But still, the history of World War II and the history of Western colonial expansion does weigh very heavily in the minds of most Westerners today, who essentially want to compensate for that. And even there, look, the history is complicated here, and it's not just one story. If you want to look at the history of Belgium's King Leopold in the Congo, it's about the most depraved form of racial superiority turned genocidal mania. There's nothing redeeming whatsoever about what they did in the Congo. But at the same time, Western civilization was in a state of expanse. It wasn't an accident. It was, this is like civilizational Darwinism. That's why. It was the strongest civilization And as I said earlier, I mean, at its very height in 1914, spanned 84% of the globe. That wasn't an accident. And other civilizations, like Islam explicitly, would love to do that. It's that they don't have the power to do so. I think, and also, I mean, if you want to look, there's good things that they brought at the same time too. No, new technologies, new roads. India has a court system as a result of the British colonialism as well. So there's a give and take here. There's a cost benefit analysis as well. And look, yeah, for sure, you want to talk about Congo? I don't doubt that at all. But all of Western civilization's colonies were not the Congo at the same time. So, the history's complicated, but there's a deep-seated, and I mean it, there's a deep-seated sense of guilt and self-flagellation and a need to compensate for that. That was, this is why the UN was founded. This is, first the League of Nations after World War I. This is why the League of Nations and the UN were founded. It was this idea that we would never repeat some of those wars that took place, that World War I and World War II, that tore the world apart.
Yeah.
But so that, yeah, I mean, we've had this. So for that reason, it's just the American left sees Western civilization as inherently corrupt. They want to tear it down. They don't really have a vision for what to replace it with. I haven't seen any vision, other than encouraging sex changes for the most part.
Yeah, I guess what I hope to see happening.
I see no vision whatsoever for the future. I see no perspective for how much worse things can get. I think most of them, I'm speaking with a broad brush here, but I think a lot of them haven't traveled. They just have this crazy notion that Western civilization is inherently corrupt, and anything that's not Western must be good. It must be better. We must emulate.
Well, it's a binary thought process. It's one or the other, and that's an evolutionary trait. We're only catching up to the amount of information we take in on a daily basis as of late. And I mean, Moore's law is just it's real, and we're still monkeys in many ways. So our psychology is playing catch up here, trying to fit in nuance and statistics and sophistication.
Yeah, I mean, that's why they come up with this idea of like Islamophobia too.
Which was, to my knowledge, a word created by the Muslim Brotherhood to just shut down conversations.
That's my understanding as well. It makes perfect sense.
Well,
and I think that it's really dangerous if we lose the ability to fundamentally criticize Islam on the basis of its founding book, on the basis of who its prophet was, on the basis of what Islamic societies have done to around the world. And Iran is a great case study for that. Look at Iran, understand what has happened to Iran, and understand why we're working right now, actively working to fix that. And it's a big deal what's going on right now. It's a very, very...
Well, Islam is an ideology, and no ideology is above scrutiny. And I'll quote Sam Harris again when he talks about religion. He says, "We use religion like we use the term sports. You have badminton and you have Muay Thai kickboxing. The only thing they have in common is breathing." Well, it's arguable that maybe Jainism or Buddhism or something is the badminton of religion, and then you have the big three on the other end of the spectrum. And in 2018, specifically, Islam is the Muay Thai of religion. It really has been since the founding of it 1400 some odd years ago, where Muhammad spread the faith by conquering and by the sword.
Yeah, dude, and I love Muay Thai. I fight Muay Thai all the time, by the way. I love Muay Thai. Yeah, that's basically right, I would say.
Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit the thumbs up button down below. Leave a comment in the comment section if you can. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I appreciate your support. Thanks for watching.